And just want to say welcome to everyone. You know, Arts Build, our mission is building community through the arts. We convene, we serve as a hub for the arts sector, we fund the arts locally, and we are working a lot more in advocacy now. So we're excited to partner with Arts Forward to offer this new series of coffee talks with mayoral candidates, really focused on the arts and the creative sector. So I just want to say welcome. Thank you to everyone participating. Thank you to Monica for all of your help and work in organizing these. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a glorious Wednesday to meet our mayoral candidates. Mr. Tim Kelly is joining us today as the first in this series of coffee hours and lunch and learns. And I'm thrilled to say that we have John Fairman as our moderator from the Chattanooga Ballet to get us kicked off. So welcome, gentlemen, and let's get this going.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone, and welcome to everyone who's on this feed, and welcome to everybody who will see it subsequently on YouTube. It is my pleasure to be here today with mayoral candidate Tim Kelly. How are you today, sir?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Well, this will be a brisk hour. We'll have 15 minutes at the end that James McKissick will take back over for some more, what I guess you would call in action question and answer. But we do have a series of questions that have been submitted by arts organizations, individuals, and we'd like to just dive into it if that's okay. So obviously I think a great place to start, and may I call you Tim?
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic, Tim. So I think one of the most fundamental aspects is, can you just talk a little bit about your background in the arts, you know, whatever you have experience in the arts, and just give people a point of reference for you within this field.
Sure. Thank you, John. And thank you guys for having me this morning. This is a great opportunity, and it's like old home week for me. So to sort of kick it off, I was on the Allied Arts Board for many years, actually on the executive committee. Unfortunately, had to roll off in the midst of the last recession, 08, 09, or I'd probably still be there. Who knows? But I grew up in an artistic family. My grandmother was a visual artist. Both my parents were musicians. My sister is an accomplished pianist, and I'm a drummer. And I grew up playing in bands, and you know, I'm a musician myself to this day. So the arts community is both, you know, personally very important to me, and again, really, really integral, I think, to what makes Chattanooga a great city. So that's
great. You know, that word integral, that's a good word. Talk to us a little bit. You know, I think both philosophically and also specifically, if you can, you know, about what role you believe local government and perhaps even your administration would play in the arts.
Okay, well, on the campaign trail, I've been talking a lot about focusing, being more intentional about Chattanooga's brand, you know, who we are and what makes us great, what's our sort of competitive advantage. And one of the two things is, without a doubt, the arts. The other is kind of our outdoor built environment. But the arts is a huge, huge part of what makes Chattanooga a Chattanooga. And very frankly, I think we need to spend more time kind of tuning that in and naming it and defining it so that we can kind of put our arms around it, protect it, and better market it. You know, I would put. I'm a big fan of the Department of Public Art at the city now, but I think we need, if not a big department there, certainly an office of arts, culture, and history to work with Arts Build. Again, I'm not trying to, in any way, shape, or form. One of the things I've learned on the campaign trail is we have such an incredible nonprofit community here in Chattanooga. I've done a lot of work on a lot of nonprofits. The city shouldn't supplant what these nonprofits are trying to do. They should just be there to support and coordinate what the nonprofits are doing. And so that is what I would do. I would have a director of arts, culture, and history, more broadly speaking, to help coordinate efforts.
What would be, when you say coordinate efforts, can you put a little meat on that bone for us?
Yeah, well, so it's to some extent, I can kind of hear this as a recurring theme and talking to nonprofits around Chattanooga. To some extent, perhaps it's like an orchestra without a conductor. From my time on the Allied on then Allied Arts Board, I'm in a bad habit of still saying Allied Arts. I'm sorry, but what is now the Artsville Board. You know, I mean, you guys do incredible work. But the city, many times, sometimes it's maybe tactical versus strategic. The city could do a better job of helping support, coordinate, promote, convene resources so that we can accomplish these strategic initiatives together. And there's some things that the city can do that very frankly, one player can't do. So I think it's kind of a leadership thing, frankly, and I think that's perhaps what's been lacking. I love New Orleans. It's my other favorite city, and so I look at a lot of the way that things are done in New Orleans, and you know, Riverbend's unfortunate demise. Not to get off topic, but you know, if it ever gets rebooted, my charge has been, and I spent a little time on the Friends of the Festival Board. You know, that should be to Chattanooga what Jazz Fest is to New Orleans, right? But first we have to help define what is our culture. And you know, Nashville has a very distinct musical culture. Obviously Knoxville does too. I think, you know, I think the city could help sort of collectively define and then market and support our arts culture here, because it's there, but it still feels a little bit too beneath the surface to me.
I think, you know, we can't see them, but my instinct is there's probably a lot of nodding heads from what you just said. And although I think this isn't on the sheet, this is the classic moderator follow-up, but I can't help, based on what you just said, ask you to talk a little bit about the intersection of what you just said, which is very interesting, with the Chattanooga Tourism Company. And how those two things can intersect. And that's all I'm asking, not talking about any kind of specific finance policy, but any ideas you have on that front.
Yeah, and I've said this before, so it won't come as a surprise to anybody. I think it's kind of unfortunate that they went from the Chattanooga Convention and Visitors Bureau directly to the Chattanooga Tourism Company. Tourism is important to Chattanooga. There's no question about it, and we can and should be promoting the arts through the Chattanooga Tourism Company. But you know, those dollars generated have to actually support a healthy, you know, to have to support the things they're using to draw people to Chattanooga, which I would say are the arts, and again, the outdoor stuff. So, you know, I can't say what we would do budgetarily there, but I would say my charge to them would be to broaden the net a little bit and help create and support the things that they're using to draw visitors here. Got it.
There is a question that had been submitted that I think there's actually a couple now. I'm going to go into some submitted questions that I think just follow this thought pattern that we're on now. And the specific question is, what role can the city play in helping Chattanooga become one of America's great music cities, which is the flavor of what you were just talking about. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, again, I think the city's role as a convener could be useful there. I mean, I've spent a ton of time thinking about this as a musician myself. Chattanooga is such an interesting intersection of race and culture and history. And again, it's certainly not Nashville. It's not Knoxville. In some ways, it's the intersection of the upland South and the lowland South, and African-American culture and Appalachian culture. And you know, it's not a simple sort of stereotypical, well, this is our brand. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt to define it and get our arms around it. I'm not a smart enough guy to do that. But we can and should try, right? So that, I don't know what that looks like, whether that's whether that's getting a bunch of smart people in the same room and hashing through it, or bringing in somebody to help us work through it. But that's, I think, what needs to happen.
Interesting. So there are two questions here that I think blend in. You talked about race and culture and history. So I'm going to read both of these questions together because I think you can kind of weave them together. But the question is, what would you do to ensure that major public art acquisitions by our city support and represent local Black artists? And then the second question is, how would you bring the number of Black public art up to equal of that of other art represented? And so what we're talking about largely here, and there's a lot of questions here. And so one of the themes here is this idea of how can we do a better job on inclusion? But if you could address those two specific questions, let's just start with major public art acquisitions by the city. What are your thoughts on that subject, end stop? And then how would you make sure that local Black artists are a equitable part of those considerations?
Okay, so you probably didn't think of that as a softball, but for me it is, because the other thing you need to know about me is I'm a localist at heart. I mean, Chattanooga Football Club is near and dear to my heart. I was a co-founder there, and to me, it really is more about localism than it is about sport. And so, look, I'm a huge believer in, just from an economic, from a cultural, from a philosophical perspective, in keeping things local. And I think local art should reflect local artists. There's plenty of talented local artists. Again, I don't want to quibble with prior administration's decisions about, the creation or placement of public art, but we should be supporting our local art scene first and foremost. There's plenty of very high quality art here that is both more authentic and probably, just very frankly, simpler from an installment and maintenance standpoint. There's 1,000 reasons to do it. Specifically to the equity question, again, I'm a student of history, and I'm glad that we're finally in a place where we're recognizing historical inequities. And the most vibrant part of our local arts culture has been from the African American community. There's no question about that. It's really undebatable. And so we should be celebrating that and making sure that local Black artists are getting, if not their fair share, the lion's share of representation, not only in public art, but in our broad artistic community.
Do you have any, just, tangenting on that second question, how would you bring, I think there's a missing word, how would you bring the number of Black public art up equal to that? Do you have any ideas about how we might, specifically address that issue of making sure that Black public art is equal to the other art represented?
I'll confess, John, that I have not really dived into the library of acquisition from Chattanooga's public art department, but I will do that. I can just tell you philosophically, again, I'm a localist. B, I'm a huge fan of sort of outsider art generally. So, the notion of curating somebody's idea of a great sculpture from California versus patronizing a local African-American artist, to me, is not even a difficult choice at all. So I would make sure, let me be 100% clear, that local Black artists have their fair share of representation in public art.
Great, thanks, Tim. All right, I want to just move along. I want to ask a little more of what you would call a tactical bureaucratic question. What changes would you make to the existing ordinances and/or laws that would enhance Chattanooga's nightlife? And by nightlife, I believe we're talking about any, arts-oriented nightlife, music and such.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I will say broadly, I think there's a lot of code and ordinance reform, sensible, common sense stuff that needs to be done just to make the city easier to do business with. And this is another one of those areas. I will say, Jonathan Sussman's been really much easier to work with lately since he's been there to get road closures and things done. But I think we can take that to the next level. I think, and that includes making, very frankly, open container permits easier to obtain when we want to do outdoor festivals and things of that nature, and making it easier to just streamline, whether it's a neighborhood festival. I mean, I think one of my platforms is really putting more focus on neighborhood development. I like to say, great great cities are composed of great neighborhoods. And so, making it easier to do things. If somebody wants to do a music festival or a pop-up thing in a park on 10 days or 2 weeks notice, we should be able to do that. And I would make that a priority.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, before I go off into maybe some more specific questions, I do think this one is connected to this overarching theme you talked about the outdoors and the arts as being, I don't want to use the wrong word. What did you call those? You said when you were on the campaign, you talked about the outdoors and the arts as the marketing flagships, or what was the?
I don't know what I said, but yeah, I think they are really they are our competitive advantages, maybe is what I said. I mean, they are, in the business world.
Brand. I'm a good moderator. I wrote it down. Brand.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's great. So let's talk about, again, on this idea of arts as a brand. There's a couple questions here. How can the city support the arts sector to spur economic growth? Now, we've been talking a lot about inclusion, but this is an unheralded subject that I think a lot of people in the arts talk about is how much economic activity the arts in this city and this region actually bring to bear. And I guess I'm tipping out of moderator a little bit to say that I think the sense out in the community is this is undervalued by a number of constituencies in the governmental levels. So do you have any thoughts about how the city can support this idea of support the arts sector to spur economic growth, which is right in line with what you talked about with brand? So anything broadly, but anything specifically would be great.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is at the core of what I would love to do as mayor. We all remember, I mean, when I was on the board, it was when VW relocated here, and famously they did it at the Hunter Museum is when they did their big announcement. And they were very clear about the fact that it was Chattanooga's arts community that was kind of the thing that tipped the scales towards why they relocated here. I mean, that gets forgotten, but it should never, ever be forgotten, right? And so we should be using the arts more intentionally to market not only for corporate relocation, but for, in the wake of COVID and in the gig economy, you've got a lot of people who move to town kind of over the transom, who maybe are consultants or small business people who choose to be here for what we would broadly say is, quality of life. Well, arts is a huge, huge part of that. And they'll tell you that. I mean, we all know people who fit in this category. So we need to be more intentional about marketing the arts for that reason. And then last, I would actually put tourism. I think tourism is kind of the icing on the cake, very frankly. I would use the arts more intentionally to market to both, again, the corporate, and again, what gets overlooked is these wave of people who are relocating from other places who could choose to be anywhere, but want to be in a city with a really, really vibrant, authentic art scene. And that's critically important to understand.
Do you think there are opportunities, and this is, again, I think we're all shaded by the world, the pandemic world we're in now.
Yep.
But, I'd like to ask you and all of us to kind of set ourselves several years into the future when I believe things will be back to normal and budgets are less constrained. I think there's just a very blunt question that sits on the table for any candidate, which is, in this context that you just laid out, is there support? And I'm talking about funding, additional funding from the city for whatever you want to say, festivals or projects or anything that can support those kinds of things that we talk about, which are fantastic. And I think everybody believes in. It's a great engine. The gasoline is funding. Do you feel philosophically that that's the city's role, that the city has a role to play there?
Yes. I mean, very frankly, again, very clearly it does. And not only because it's kind of the right thing to do from a cultural perspective, but from a very utilitarian economic perspective. It is, again, one of our two, we've got a hand of cards. And again, I think this we need to collectively to go back to a place where we're realizing we are, from an economic perspective, in a competition with other cities. And the hand we've been dealt is candidly not a great hand, pinched between Nashville and Atlanta and a lot of other cities, economically speaking. But the two best cards in our hand, one of them is the arts. And so it is a selfish, it's a utilitarian motive, really. I mean, it's great also if you love the arts, but it's one of the two really strong cards we have to play. So absolutely, I think spending money there to help promote it is a wise decision.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to move us on to more about arts in education. And the question that was submitted is an interesting one. Do you think that art can be instrumental in helping students do better in other classes such as science and math? And if yes, explain. And this is pretty interesting because this comes from a time when we have been hammering STEM, and then there's this idea of STEAM, that art is that A gets put in there, and this whole concept and if I may digress for just a second, Tim, this idea of like for many years, nationally, not just, but the arts and other these things were kind of set aside in favor of hard skills, hard skills. But now it feels like we see this resurgence, that there is a missing piece to this equation. And this is what this question is getting at.
Yep.
So can you talk about just, I think, overall, just your idea of the arts in education, but also answering this question specifically, which is how do you see the arts, helping these other hard skills? Do you or do you not?
No, I absolutely do. And again, I don't think it, I know it. I mean, the data supports it. I mean, this goes back to, again, my time on the board there, when we really didn't have the studies, and the studies were just starting to come in, because we knew it anecdotally. We knew that kids who had the arts did better. And I think now we have the science to back it up and the data to back it up. And it's not, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense that the nature of work is changing to become more creative. Critical thinking and creativity is more important than it's ever been. And the arts are what foster that. It's a different part of the brain that it's lighting up and turning on. So I'm a huge believer in arts and education. I worked very hard on it, when I was there on the board, and I believe that to this day.
Fantastic. Thank you for your answer on that. Next question tangents off that. Can you tell us any of your thoughts on how the influence of art on youth who may have been in contact with the law, using arts as, diversionary or interceding in some lives that perhaps are off track or on their way to becoming off track?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very familiar with the work that they do, that Francis McDonald does at Mark Making. I'm a huge fan of that, and we also know that that those alternate forms of expression do give kids who have had, very frankly, juvenile crime is a function of emotional disturbance, and using art is well known for now, well over 100 years, to be the most effective way to express that in nonverbal ways. Particularly boys have a hard time with that, and so art's a great way to be able to use that as a relief valve. So I think somewhere else, maybe in the questions, I'd love to be able to use YFD centers not only as recreation. If you think about it, should be more than just sports, and YFD centers could very well be used as places for kids to go create art, to sort of really expand the Mark Making model across the city.
Well, there's actually a question, and I'll just read it to you. How can the arts have a stronger presence within the recreation centers?
Yeah, that is, I think, how, right? I think the rec centers are a great asset, going back to sort of a great city being composed of great neighborhoods. the YFD centers can and should be used as places for kids to be able to come. I mean, again, there's a lot being accomplished there. The main thing is they're working through stuff outside school, outside the pressures of school. So I would change things a little bit in that, I think right now they're being used in ways that sometimes turn kids off or away, and they should be really safe places where kids can go just to have fun, stay out of trouble, and do things that are creative and productive, including not only sports, but art.
Do you see funding of these centers or funding specifically for arts-based programs within these centers as something that could be a focus of your budgets?
I can't, I'm loath to make promises that I can't keep, but we're diving into the budget now and kind of deconstructing it, but I can tell you it would be a priority. I think a lot of it has to do more so with instruction and direction and focus of the leadership in the centers than it does perhaps, constructing the right agenda and focus rather than a budget issue. But I can tell you, we would look really closely at it because I do think it's a super important area.
So in your eyes, laying it out as a priority for the recreation centers could be an on-ramp for those that run those facilities.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think it goes back.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, it's defining what they're there for, right? And again, it dovetails nicely into the broad premise that if they're there, again, think about the concept of recreation. The whole concept of that is not to get too wonky, but the ludic part of the brain that allows sort of stress relief and uses all that alternate wiring that you wouldn't use sitting behind a desk at school falls into two main categories, right? Sports and art. So it just makes sense with the general philosophy we'd be pursuing. Okay,
thank you. And I think the quote, the ludic part of the brain, possibly could be t-shirt material. That's a good quote. I want to ask you a specific question that came in that's kind of off a theme. We're going to start a different theme. The city is currently working towards the design phase for a new modern regional skate park. What are your thoughts on this project, and how do you think you would approach funding parks and recreation in general? So I guess
I can't say I've thought much about the skate park issue. I definitely need to look into that a little bit more. I'm not a hater, but I'm not a skater. So what am I gonna? I don't know. I just that one I need to dive into another t-shirt. But I can tell you, Parks and Rec would definitely be a priority from a funding perspective. I do think we would do things a little bit differently with Parks and Rec as I've described, integrating the arts more, also integrating outdoor activities more. So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to take a pass on the first one, but I don't really have a very considered opinion on it yet.
Very good. So let me ask this question. This is I'm going to take the camera way up for a question that was submitted. This I think is an umbrella that sits over a lot of the comments that you've made today, is, in your opinion, what are the primary roles of city government?
Well, that is a great one. I think, look, government should be doing what private enterprise cannot or will not do. I mean, that's the broadest way to say it, right? A lot of folks on the right like to talk about the free market. Well, who prints our money? Who paves the roads? Who creates the infrastructure for things to thrive and survive? So I think government is there, city government particularly, to provide the infrastructure for the rest of the community. Sort of think of it as a trellis for a vine to grow on, right? The trellis has got to be in the right place. It's got to be in the sun. The soil's got to be right. It's there to support at the broadest levels, the community to survive and to thrive in the best way that it can. So I mean, again, very broad philosophical question, but there's a very broad philosophical answer.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And do you think that philosophy that you're talking about and your approach to it is a substantial shift from where we are now?
Oh, I don't think so. I will say this. I think government is there to guide and facilitate. I think there are examples now where the city has gone into the business of a particular area where a nonprofit here already was and doing a pretty adequate job. And I don't think I see the city government more again as the orchestra conductor than as the actor itself. I mean, if there are areas where we don't have people or assets or organizations to fulfill essential city functions, then government has to step in and will step in, or if the city is better positioned to do it. But absent that, again, we have an incredible nonprofit community here, and I think rather than fighting with it or asking it to jump through multiple hoops, we should be leveraging it to be the best it can. I'll use this opportunity to say this, which is just kind of a philosophical observation that I've had on the campaign trail. And there are multiple people that are on this call I can see who fit this description, but Chattanooga is full of people, really talented people that could be in another market, making more money, or in some higher position on an abstract idea of a career ladder, right? And we all kind of know that. We know people like that, but it hit me early on in this process that is a very powerful thing. What does it mean? What are the implications? The implications are that we all value something else other than ourselves primarily, right? Something other than, it's all about me. And that sense of community is something we don't talk about much, but it's hugely powerful. And I think it is kind of Chattanooga's superpower generally. So I don't mean that city government should sort of abdicate and lay back and I'm not just sort of a small government, low tax person for the sake of being that. What I'm saying is you get a lot more done with an engaged populace than you do, with a government saying thou shalt.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you for opening up like that. I'd like to take this moment because I'm seeing some questions coming in on the chat. I would just like to remind everybody who is on the call that if you do have questions, either through the chat or there is a Q&A button to submit your questions, and we will be getting to those in looks like about 10 minutes. But I do want to, you've been really open in talking about as much specificity as I think you can and philosophy as you can, but this is always a good time, towards the end for people to get a sense of who you are. And you talked about it a little bit at the beginning. You said, if I'm looking at my notes, that you came grew up in an arts family and you were on the board of Allied Arts, now Arts Build. But why don't you just kind of tell folks, can you just open up about your personal background and experience with the arts? Just give people a little more insight into that role in your life, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, again, I grew up in an artistic family. Music in particular has always been near and dear to me, although I've been an on and off visual artist, and it's a huge part of who I am, and always will be, right? One of the things we did from a business perspective very, very early on, it's probably worth noting, I'm a perennial giver to Arts Build and have supported it many, over the last 30 years. But from a corporate perspective, we also were one of the first and longest standing supporters of Nightfall, because Nightfall, I thought, was one of the great ways that we could support, local art and local artists and really bring Chattanoogans of all walks of life together. Again, art has the power to do that. Art has the power to bring people from different races and cultures together in a way that very few other things, soccer most notably, do, right? So I just am a huge believer in the power of art to do that, and it's not an act, right? I mean, I think if you look at my track record over the last 30 years, um, it supports that. I was actually on the Allied Arts Board when Create Here. A lot of people don't remember this, but Create Here split off from Allied Arts. Josh McManus at that time was an intern at Allied Arts, and what we were struggling with on the board was we had these kind of older, more established traditional art institutions like the Hunter and the Symphony that needed funding, predictably. But we had this growing grassroots art scene that really was kind of the bubbling heart of this nascent kind of culture movement in Chattanooga that wasn't really getting any focus or attention. And that was in the early days of Soundcore. Soundcore sort of started out of that. So I really have been there from the ground floor through all this. And I'm running largely. I don't have any future political ambition at all. I only care about Chattanooga. I really do. I don't. I just want to sort of do my time and see Chattanooga be the city that it can be. I was listening to a Andrew Yang podcast the other day, and he was saying that as an entrepreneur, he hates the thing that keeps him up at night is wasted potential. And that's me. It just lit me up when I heard that, because that, as much as any reason, is why I'm doing this. I have seen the city that Chattanooga can be and the potential it has, particularly in this artistic sense. And I can't, again, I can't stand by and watch it not happen. So at some point, I've never been a government guy. I never even ran for student council in school. But I've spent 30 years not only in the entrepreneurial and business community, but in the nonprofit community. And then at some point, you realize there's only so much you can do standing on the sidelines with philanthropy, and you have to get involved in public policy to make stuff happen. And so here I am.
That's great. Thank you very much. In the couple of minutes that I have left with you, I want to give you the opportunity, pardon me, to talk just in the most general terms. Earlier in the interview, or the forum, I should say, you talked about Riverbend, and you mentioned something about if that comes back, what forms that could take. Do you want to talk just a little bit about either that? It doesn't have to be that specific thing, but this idea of I guess festivals, whether, Riverbend, it's a music festival, or, you mentioned a jazz festival.
Yeah.
This idea going into brand, I just want to kind of give you an open forum to talk about that, whether it's specifically Riverbend or beyond.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll start with Riverbend. I was the last guy on the Friends of the Festival board, last guy out. I had to resign to begin to run this race, so I was only there for a whistle stop, but I was there long enough to help really drive and convene the conversation around what it should be, because very frankly, I saw then that it wasn't going to work in its current configuration. And for those that may have joined the call late, my kind of thumbnail elevator pitch thesis there was that it should be to Chattanooga what Jazz Fest is to New Orleans, right? So less of a conventional narrow music festival and more of a celebration of local arts and culture, right? There's something in all of us that wants to do that. But if you think about the reason that the Bessie Smith Strut, which was always my favorite part of Riverbend, was there, it was back in those days when things were even more awkward between Black and white culture. It was kind of a groundbreaking way to try to bring races and cultures together. And that's what Riverbend, I think, should be, is as much of an art festival as a music festival. And to the extent that it is a music festival, more about local music and local musicians, right? So again, part of that is defining what is our culture locally. What is it that makes Chattanooga special? I think it's a little bit of one of those Ouija board things where we all kind of have our hands on it. We all sort of think we know what it is, but it doesn't really have a name or a definition, and I'm kind of become obsessed with that. But yeah, so in short, I would love to see Riverbend come back, but I would love to see it come back in a more refined form.
Great. And I think I have time for one last question, but as you answer this, I'm just going to scan through and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. One of the issues that percolates pretty below the surface, Tim, is performance space. We have the Tivoli at 1,600 plus seats, which is just enormous. There is the Walker Theater, but that, is something that was built, I believe, in the 20s or 30s, or perhaps even earlier. And so it has a lot of restrictions to it. But beyond that, it is this idea of performance space. It gets a lot of conversation, but not a lot of very public conversation. So this is my question that I'm bringing to the table. There's the Alston redevelopment. There's a variety of other projects in town. And I just want to throw out this idea of performance space and find out if you have heard of this issue, if you have any ideas on this issue. And then if not, just this idea of conceptually, purely concept of a more, I'll use the word municipal performance space, understanding that has a lot of possible kryptonite to it, but I'm using it more as a concept.
Well, again, because I don't have future political ambitions, I'm probably going to be a lot less cautious than other candidates, perhaps. But listen, it's not just, so the short answer is yes, I've thought a lot about it. And this is one of the things that the city can do that our Arts Build probably thinks about, but may not have may not be at where Arts Build may be at the 10,000 foot level, the city could be at the 30,000 foot level, thinking about things broadly. And it's an ecosystem like any other ecosystem, right? We think about everything from JJ's all the way up to, the Memorial Auditorium or the Tivoli, and there needs to be a logical sort of build in terms of space and size and accessibility. And I should say it's not just performance space, it's practice space. When I was in New York in the 80s and, as a drummer, working as a drummer, we had this thing called Giant Studios. It was amazing. It was on 14th Street, and they had a big, one big central ante room. You'd find a lot of gig musicians in there just looking to play. And then you had practice rooms. You had like 8 practice rooms around it. When I was on the Sound Corps board, we talked about, how great it would be for Chattanooga to have. Chattanooga needs something like that to support the local art scene. I was also recently on the Tivoli Foundation board, and I will say, the Tivoli Foundation has acquired the center next door. And again, way too early to say how this will pan out, but I would love to see that space be a community performance and practice space, to see that there be space designated in there for the community to be able to use, not only for performance, but practice.
Great. I've looked, although there's 2 minutes left, I don't see a question here that would really fit into 2 minutes. And actually we covered just a tremendous amount of ground. So thank you very much, Tim. I think that seems to me to be a very logical and perfect point to begin to move it back to Mr. McKissick, because I am seeing I can't see them, but I see a lot of numbers next to Q&A and chat. I want to turn it back over and get those questions out to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
And thank you. So I'm going to attempt to get through the questions in the Q&A because some of them are a little bit different. I'm going to start with what are the strategies that you will use to keep talented people in Chattanooga from leaving to a bigger market that can pay more or provide them with a better life or title or position?
Well, so that is a great question, and it is one of the my decision to run for mayor was a process. I read a book that really helped push me towards the decision. It was called The New Geography of Jobs, and the thesis is really that the nature of work is changing, and that bigger cities like Nashville and Atlanta really are a huge threat, and to cities like Chattanooga, because they're siphoning off our talent. And because we don't have the big companies and the money to keep those people here a lot of times, again, the arts community is one of the only cards we have to play to keep them here. It goes back to quality of life broadly. And for those who realize that there is more to life than a paycheck, we have to support the arts community. And to some extent, it's about freedom, right? And the ability to create. I have a friend who moved here from Portland recently in Seattle, and the things that he wants to do, he couldn't do there. He literally couldn't do. He'd been frozen out of it. So we've got the city can play a role to make sure that that those things are still possible. I've been talking recently just in private circles about some really exciting arts related projects that wouldn't be possible in larger cities where where resources are not as available and real estate is much more expensive. So I'm very, very tuned in and intentional and focused on that.
Thank you. This question is from Nicole. Public art is focused primarily on visual art forms. Do you have plans of expanding that department to include performing arts like theater, dance, or music for children who come to the YFD centers on a regular basis?
Yes. So I would, again, the city does a good job in the public arts department now, but I would expand that to cover, arts, culture, and history. And so we would be looking to work, with Arts Bill to expand beyond simply public art or visual public art.
And this attendee asks, how do you feel about charging a minimal fee for arts activities? This would help pay art instructors, and we're all about paying our artists, and give those who sign up an opportunity to have some skin in the game.
I'm a big believer in that. I'm a fan of not, again, to get a little wonky here, in behavioral economics, and behavioral economics teaches us that skin in the game concept is very powerful and important. Just from the baseline of getting people used to the idea that artists need to be paid, that they need to be compensated for their work. So again, I think if it's scaled to be affordable and not be an obstacle to people enjoying the arts, it's absolutely appropriate.
So this one says, Mayor Burke restructured city departments, shaking things up. YFD, for instance, would you keep the current department structure, or would you reinvent the wheel similar to what Mayor Burke did at the beginning of his tenure?
Well, I would say this: I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I would probably go back to the old wheel. How about that? I mean, I admire a lot of what Mayor Burke did in rethinking city departments, but I think a lot of it, I'd say a lot of times, a great idea, great ideas are great, but if they can't be faithfully executed, a lot of times they can have unintended consequences and don't work as well. So I think in the case of YFD and rec centers, we would probably do a little bit of a rewind, and again, focus on them primarily as recreation centers. I do like the idea of using YFD for a lot of social services, but we would take a deep dive there. Again, I don't have an agenda other than to see Chattanooga function effectively. I'm not party affiliated, so I don't have patronage to pay in terms of positions or anything of that nature. My only function is, my only goal is to really see the city function at its highest level.
As you can tell, Chattanoogans are really passionate about youth and arts, especially in the YFD centers and in communities. So this is another question about that, but it kind of focuses on the buildings and I guess the infrastructure. Many buildings do not have facilities for theater, dance, or even classes for arts. For example, no access to sinks except in the kitchen, no storage. How would you work to make those types of facilities changes that would help facilitate more arts in the communities?
Well, I mean, obviously that's a tougher one. I would say two things. One, I think, the city could work more closely with the school system on a lot of this stuff, on joint priorities, and we would. Two, the city's sitting on roughly 1,000 properties around the city that used to be in, what was referred to as a land bank that I don't think anything ever happened with, that are literally just sitting there, unleveraged, unused, and so I again, not being, I can't be specific or make any promises there, but to the extent that it is a priority, and arts would be a priority, if there's a simple solution to help expand capacity or access, we're going to do it.
So this is from Olga, and she wants to know, Chattanooga was recently mentioned in the Wallet Hub study as being among the 10 most dangerous cities in the country.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do to get our name off that list?
Well, let me start by saying we did study that. It's I think 42 criteria, one of which was the presence or absence, binary presence or absence of a terrorist attack in the last 10 years. Obviously, we had that terrible incident at the ROTC Center a few years back. I don't think that's indicative of our, so I can't say that I'd necessarily agree with the premise, but it's not helpful. And I would do, what it takes to get us off that list, because we need to come off. I mean, public safety is a big concern, probably not an appropriate topic for this call, but rest assured, I'm looking at, every conceivable aspect of municipal government, and good government, and clearly, making Chattanooga a safer city is also very high on the list for me.
And that's true. And Americans for the Arts, in a lot of their studies, it shows that cities and municipalities that invest in the arts and support the arts actually do have lower crime rates and more public safety.
Well, a lot of it goes back to the rec centers, right? I mean, if children or adolescents with nothing else to do are going to find something to do, right? And kids that feel disempowered are going to find ways to feel powerful. The arts are a great way for people, and children in particular, to feel engaged and express themselves and feel powerful. So I think there's a real reason for that.
Well, we're coming to the end of our coffee chat, and I just wanted to see, Mr. Kelly, if you had any last words, and then we'll close it down.
I love you all, and I think Chattanooga's art community is. Nobody tells you thank you enough, because again, if you imagine, I'm a big fan of sometimes considering the counterfactual, and if it weren't for Chattanooga's arts community, my God, where would we be? It would not be the same city by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm not kidding when I say that if I get the opportunity to be your next mayor, I will do everything I can to help grow and nurture and support the arts.
Well, we appreciate you for spending time with us this morning, and for everyone who submitted questions. John, we appreciate you and thank you. Do you want to do a quick commercial for the Nutcracker?
Well, I would love to. We are currently filming this year we can't do a live version, so we're currently filming the Nutcracker at 12 different locations across the city. And I'm pleased to say that it will be broadcast for free on WTCI on the 19th, 20th, and Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at a variety of times that I won't even get into, but we'll make sure that marketing gets out to everybody. But it's the free Chattanooga Ballet Nutcracker, a gift to the community this year with the support of a lot of great sponsors, which I won't mention here. But we'll put those out as well. Thank you.
Well, we're excited for it this year. And I also would like to thank Monica Kinsey for her work with Arts Forward and in organizing these forums. The arts are a major economic driver in our city. They make our city a great place to live, work, and play. I just want to remind you that at 10:30 today, Arts Build is offering a webinar or workshop on your annual fund 101. So for those arts organizations that are looking to explore starting an annual fund, that'll be an opportunity to learn how to do that. And on Friday, we will be having another coffee chat, or I guess this one will be a lunch chat with Monty Brule, and that one will be moderated by Edna Varner. So please make sure to log in for that one. Thank you for this opportunity and for being able to do this. I don't know if you have any final words, Monica.
Just wanted to thank John for your wonderful being the first one to moderate for our series. You did a fantastic job and breezed through all these questions. Thank you, Tim, for answering all these questions and for also being the first in this series. If 2020 has shown us anything, it's shown our inequities and how our underserved arts community was resilient or is resilient, and also how it was very dependent on, to get us through and to continue to get us through. So, your support of the arts community is tremendous and very well needed. And we look forward to the town hall on February 3rd at 6 o'clock with all our remaining candidates. And again, thank you so much. We appreciate you all.
Thank you, and everyone
Thank
have
you.
a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.